we have to understand how the human brain works.
Hello, and welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by HippoDirect. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's unleashing creativity to grow their business. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, digital marketing dude at HippoDirect, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com for help with podcasting or digital marketing. This is episode 49er, and today's guest is Steve Woodruff. To put it clearly, he's the king of clarity. He's made a career of helping businesses find their crystal clear focus, so clear it leads to sales and referrals. You'll hear how you can be crystal clear yourself, the takeaways from his hot book, Clarity Wins, and what all this has to do with brain science, astronomy, and even more. That clear? Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with the king of clarity, Steve Woodruff. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing just great. How about you, Max?
Doing just great as well. Thanks so much for coming on. And before we get into it, I want to shout out a couple of buddies of yours and buddies and previous guests on this podcast, Jay Baer with Talk Trickers and Mark Schaefer with Marketing Rebellion. You three have launched some amazing books around the same time. So small world here.
Those are two of my favorite comrades in arms, and both great gentlemen and talented people.
Absolutely. So you're in good company there. But Steve, Senior Clarity, that's my new nickname for you. So Mr. King of Clarity, for anybody that's not too familiar with you yet, can you start us off with a little intro of what you were up to before you got into clarity? So just ignore clarity for this part. Ignore what you've been up to for the past several years. How did your career start out?
Well, it started out in working in a very small medical device firm, and we were marketing test and measurement equipment for radiation medicine. And because it was a small company, my initial role was in sales, but I just had this kind of interest in marketing and messaging and branding. And we were just a handful of people, so I got to kind of play with that and liked it a lot. And after 10 years of that, I moved on to a software firm that was developing an online testing solution primarily for commercial pharmaceutical sales training, which I just loved that job. And I got to wear a lot of hats there, including more on branding, marketing, consulting, making partnerships. It was just a delightful experience. And I really got to see how the sausage gets made with software, which can be a little frightening at times. So that was a wonderful 10-year run. And then I stayed in that industry of commercial pharma consulting, but I started out on my own 13 years ago, doing a matchmaking consultancy for these same group of vendors that I'd gotten to know over 10 years and the same group of training organizations within pharma companies. But there was this gap of understanding. A lot of the training companies just sounded the same. They didn't differentiate. The training people on the pharma side would say, man, I can't tell one of these companies from another. And there was just bad branding going on, and also a lot of bad decisions being made, just picking the wrong vendor. So I decided to set up this unique matchmaking service working on a referral fee basis. And part of that was sitting down with these vendor companies and helping them figure themselves out, figure out their brand and their differentiator. And because I wanted to make targeted referrals. So clarity as a practice grew out of working with these small companies. And I realized that I could provide a unique and creative perspective to helping them figure out their sweet spot. And since then, I've been doing clarity for all kinds of companies and businesses, but it started in pharma training, and I still to this day do a lot of my work there.
Wow. So I want to get backwards before we get forwards here. So you've done a wide range of things, all right, just in what you spoke about already, but going back to college and when you were thinking about what you want to do in your career, I mean, is this anything close to what you studied? Like, did you know you were going to end up on that path when you were younger?
No, like most of us, my path was not linear at all. So my intention going to college was I wanted to go into astronomy because
Oh,
I
of
owned
course.
a telescope. I loved stuff. I love outer space, still do, still read up on that stuff, still read science fiction. But, in my kind of woolly headed youth, I didn't realize that 99% of being in astronomy is physics and calculus.
Hmm.
And so I ran into a wall my freshman year at Vanderbilt of physics and calculus, and that changed my mind quickly about that career path. But I started taking courses in psychology and really liked it. I found that I had a fascination with ideas and with how the human brain works. And so I ended up getting my degree in psychology, and that indirectly fed more into the idea of marketing and branding because it's a similar thing. How do you process information? How do you communicate? What strikes the mind? What makes people act? It was a wandering path, and as I often tell people, that sometimes it's your 40s or 50s before you really figure out what you're going to do when you grow up.
Right. Yeah. And you hear people of all ages say, I still have no idea what I'm doing, even, people that are very successful. So you really never know. I'm curious, do you still do physics and calculus in your free time? It sounds like you're pretty passionate about
The really ironic thing was that first job I described in medical devices. The main audience we were selling to was medical physicists, and so I had to
it.
come right up against my worst fear. But I found that when I was working with things, not just theory in classroom, but devices and watching things and numbers and wavelengths and all that, I could understand it. And my high point in that job was 5 years down the road when somebody said, "So, are you a medical physicist?" And I almost died laughing because physics had been my Achilles heel.
Right.
But I still love science, physics not so much, but DNA and how the brain works, neuromarketing. Those are things that absolutely fascinate me, and I wish I could clone myself and have one of me dedicated to DNA and another to biology. And some of these things just absolutely turn my wheels.
Well, the way science is progressing, maybe in a few years we'll be able to do that. Who knows? But those are clearly passion areas for you, though. All the math and intense calculus jokes aside, have you found a way to tie that into what you're doing now with clarity?
Not really. So I still watch science fiction, still love it. I still read books on genetics and other things. The one thing I have stolen or borrowed from science is that the concept of DNA I find to be very important in coming to grips with what an individual's sweet spot is and what a company's sweet spot is. And I call it DNA or wiring. That I think we each of us have particular superpowers, particular skills. And when I go through a clarity session with a person or a company, my first goal is to find the DNA, to find out how exactly are you wired? What makes you really excited? What have you succeeded in? What are your unique strengths? And that provides the key for the positioning and branding and strategic approach of the company. You've got to figure out the DNA first. Otherwise, you're just another commodity company doing something that a bunch of other people do.
Right. And you don't want to be in that space. Let's dive into clarity, full force here. So you are the king of clarity. You've got the new book, Clarity Wins, which is doing incredible and released in November of 2018. And you are an expert at getting people and companies to figure out what they do, say it in a concise way, and have that lead to referrals, which we know how powerful referrals are for business. Let's just start with the word clarity. How did you decide to focus on that in itself?
That's an interesting story. When I first started doing this with companies, I called it brand therapy because it is, somewhat of a branding exercise. And a
Hmm.
lot of these sessions felt like therapy sessions. That's how deep I would dig with people. But as a branding guy, I realized I'm never going to own the term brand, and that has its own particular meaning, and it's, agencies out the wazoo do branding.
Right.
But I realized that what I'm doing is actually one step beneath branding. It's like a foundation below it of getting a clear understanding of things and putting it in clear words. I go back and forth on whether it's branding or pre-branding, and I haven't figured that out yet. But I kept finding myself using the word clarity. Then I realized at one point, well, hey, nobody really owns that word. And it might be a great way to differentiate. And so I started using the word clarity, building clarity into everything I do. And then a few years ago on my timeline, my birthday, my friend Chris Brogan said, happy birthday to the King of Clarity. And I looked at that title
Ah.
and I said, ooh, that's got some stones. I think I'm going to take that. So I just took it and ran with it. And it turns out it's been really, really effective. People remember it. And that's one of the main points of clarity is you've got to be memorable and you've got to break through and somehow differentiate. So yes, I'm faux royalty, but it seems to get embedded in people's minds, and that's great.
It does. Well, you certainly own the space. I think Chris Brogan must be the king of clarity nicknames, so we'll give him that nickname in himself. But in terms of your book, can you give a quick background of what specifically you dive into here? Because you cover clarity throughout your career in a number of ways, but what's the main message that you're trying to get across in this book?
I boil it down to two main messages. So the first message is we have to understand how the human brain works. And I go into a brief practical discussion of the filtering system, the gatekeeper of the brain, the reticular activating system, which once you understand the RAS and how it filters for relevance and filters for what's new, that is the key to all effective communications, whether it's marketing, sales, training, emails, meetings, everything. Everything depends on the reticular activating system
Hmm.
and the brain's capacity for processing and for memory. So there's some very foundational things about the brain that truly impact whether we're going to succeed or not. So that's how I start, is the fact that we've got this incredible environment of competition, of noise and stimulation and screens that are crowding everybody's brain. And somehow our communications have to get through there and find a home in the brain. And then the second thing that I would say, if somebody wants to summarize what's this book about in like one thing, it's embrace and love your pigeonhole. We tend as business people to have this negative, visceral reaction to the idea of being pigeonholed. I don't want to be pigeonholed. I don't want to lose any opportunity. But the point I make in the book is that people can only remember one or two things about anybody or any company. So you're going to be pigeonholed. Everybody's pigeonholed. People store a certain set of a few hashtags in their minds about us and our company. So we want to give the right hashtags. We want to say the right things, create the right mental pictures, have the right simple phrases so that we can plant ourselves in the right place in people's minds. And that, of course, establishing that pigeonhole, occupying that pigeonhole, that is the key to effective selling and effective referrals. If someone walks away from me and doesn't have a great summary in their mind about who I am, who I serve, and what I do, then they might meet someone 4 days later that would be perfect for me, and they don't know what to say. They don't remember. But if they say, oh, I just met the king of clarity, you need to talk to Steve, hey, I win. That's how referrals work.
They do. And I don't think pigeons have ever gotten more love in a book or podcast. So thank you for that. Shout out to the pigeons. But there in the book, you outline 5 different elements of clarity. Can you give a quick walkthrough of those 5 elements?
Yeah, and I stole these directly from good journalism. So most people know that a good journalist, to write a good story, has to answer the who, the what, the why, the how, the when, the where. And it turns out that when you look at these questions, answering these questions is actually the foundation of a brand and a strategy. So when I look at clarity, I look at the what, which is precisely what service or offering am I giving? And it's got to have some differentiation to it. It can't just be, well, I give advice or I'm a marketer. It's got to have some real specific to it. The for whom is who exactly am I serving? What is my ideal sweet spot customer? What I call the bullseye customer. So people talk about target markets. I think we need to be more precise. I need to paint the picture of the bullseye customer if you're going to remember who to refer me to. And of course, if I'm going to do well targeted sales and marketing. Then there is the why. The why is what is the business pain or hope that's going to make someone open their wallet? People don't buy in the abstract. They buy because they feel something. And we need to be able to articulate what it is that people are feeling. They're not just buying a thing, they're buying a solution to a problem. They're buying something to relieve the headache. So, what is it that we do that does that? The how, something I alluded to earlier, is what's our unique differentiating superpower. So, what makes us different from the other competitors that might be out there? A lot of companies don't really know what makes them different, and so they sound like everybody else. And then finally, the where has both a literal and a virtual component to it. Literally, where is, are you local? Do you serve regionally? Are you national? Are you virtual? Are you global? All this is important in focusing your efforts and in helping people understand who to refer you to. The where can also be virtual. Are you in a specific market sector? Are you in automotive? Are you in insurance? Are you in digital marketing? Are you in HR? So the more precisely we can describe each of these five elements, the more clear our sweet spot, our pigeonhole is, and the more focused our efforts will be.
Wow. Which of those elements would you say is the most important? If you had to pick one, I know they all work together, but
If I had to pick one, it's the for whom. Tell me the target customer. Tell me what they're feeling. Tell me what their title and role is. Tell me what they're looking for. Because if you can do that, you probably also have a pretty good idea of what you offer. And I can figure out the where, and I can probably figure out the how. The for whom is critical. And what I have found is that for many, many consultants and businesses, they leave that way too wide open. We'll just take any business that comes, revenue first and figure out the details later. But that means that everybody's your customer, which means that nobody's your customer, which means that I have no idea who to refer you to.
not a good problem to have.
Well, I mean, let's look at your podcast. Your podcast is going to have a specific focus. If I just knew, hey, Max has a podcast, and I stumbled across somebody that was doing, let's say, gardening of herbs in my neighborhood, and I said, hey, I know a guy that does podcasts. They said, okay, great, I'd love to be on his podcast. Well, that's not a good match for you. I don't think you do herb gardeners.
Yeah, well, we do appreciate some variety, so you never know. But no, your point is strong. It's true. Podcast in general is way too broad for the vast majority of people as far as guest matches go.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. So the more specific you can get there. There's another part of your book which I find very interesting is how impactful the first few seconds of interacting with someone are.
Yeah, that's what I call the first moment of truth. And this comes back down to brain science. Everybody has a filtering mechanism or a gatekeeper called the reticular activating system, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And the RAS is looking for something that is new, that is relevant, interesting, or unusual. That's what it filters for. Everything else gets filtered out as background noise. So, what that means is we only have a few seconds, whether it's an introduction, whether it's the beginning of a class, whether it's a website when somebody lands on it, whether it's a 30-second TV ad. We only have a few seconds to get through and show that, yes, we're new and interesting, and yes, we're relevant. And if we don't, we're just going to be filtered out. So we might be a wonderful person. We might have a great solution. We might have a tremendous course. We might have a hugely relevant or helpful offering on our website. But if that's not obvious to the person in the first 15 or 30 seconds, the opportunity is lost. So that's why we've got to condense and crystallize and make things extremely clear, because that's what the RAS is looking for.
Wow. And a lot of people say elevator pitch when they're talking about sort of what you're describing, but you're not too big a fan of the term elevator pitch.
No, I'm not. The concept of having a condensed message is great. Obviously, that's what I believe in. But I only have two problems with elevator pitch. Number one is the idea that you'd want to even pitch somebody in an elevator. Nobody wants to talk in an elevator. And number two, our goal is not to make a pitch. What I advocate is that we have a memory dart, which is something even more condensed. And it's a way in one or two sentences to get our point across in a way that's creates a word picture, creates interest, and hopefully leads to a deeper conversation. So what I might do, for instance, instead of an elevator pitch, is if somebody meets me and they say, "So what are you all about?" I'll say something like this. They call me the King of Clarity, and I help people succeed in the 2 moments of truth. And then I shut up. And what that does is it sort of brings people up short. What's a king of clarity? And what are the 2 moments of truth? So if I had just said, "Oh, I'm Steve Woodruff, I'm just another marketing consultant," well, okay, that's forgettable.
I already forgot. What's your name again?
Yeah, exactly. So we want to position who we are and what we do, either as individuals or as companies, in a compact, interesting, crystallized way that gets people thinking and also creates a memory hook.
In addition to yourself, with the work with your consulting that you've done over the years, what are the top examples of memory darts, or it could be just kind of sort of a case example of clarity in general, where it's turned out to be really successful and it really, really resonates with people?
I think anytime anybody communicates, very, very clearly, it stands out because there are so few of them. And particularly if you're in one of the more, what I'll call boring industries. So, banker, insurance person, lawyer, whatever. I was recently working with somebody that does insurance and has a very small company that has a sort of an alternative way of dealing with health insurance, because as you know, health insurance is a huge nightmare, keeps going up, benefits keep getting less. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned that one of the great principles of a memory dart and of a market position is you have to have a bad guy. You have to have a villain. This is just part of storytelling and even movie making, is everybody needs a villain. So in this case, we created a villain called the health insurance monster. Built after the movie The Blob, which just keeps growing and consuming everything.
Right.
And the health insurance monster keeps consuming profits off the bottom line. It's this uncontrollable, horrible beast. And this company's providing an alternative to it. So instead of just being, "Hey, I'm another insurance company, but I have a different angle. Let me tell you all the technical details," a much more effective way is to tap into the emotion and imagination. And a lot of times that involves, here's our mutual bad guy, and I'm going to help you with it.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about it. I've never come across a health insurance monster, but it doesn't sound too fun.
It's a pretty ugly thing, the way that this thing was created.
Right.
So in my book, actually, I start this way. The bad guy, and it starts right off in the first chapter, our mutual bad guy is the noise that inundates everybody, that is occupying everybody's brain, that sucks away attention. And the positioning of clarity is we're going to deal with this environmental problem we all have, which is we got to fight the noise. So you can't position what you're doing as, hey, you people are stupid and I'm going to fix it. It's we've got this bad guy, this villain, and here's how we deal with the villain.
I really like the idea of it because it's something that everyone can kind of rally around, and you can come up with different examples and people can relate to. Where did you come up with the idea of using this, metaphorical villain?
Well, it's a well-known element in Hollywood, and so it comes up many times in any kind of storytelling approach. You'll see that there's the bad guy, there's the villain, there's whatever. And if you look at Hollywood scripts and if you look at story arcs, there are a relatively modest number of arcs, and they usually involve a bad guy. This was highlighted very nicely for me with another consultant that lives here in the Nashville area, Donald Miller, who has a great workshop called the Story Brand Workshop, which is a way of taking your brand and turning it into a story that's built on this idea of script. And one of the things, of course, in a script is the bad guy. So one of the interesting things to do for any company is, as we look at your positioning and your differentiating, is what's the identity of bad guy? And it's got to be usually more than just your competitor. Oh, well, that company's the bad guy, but I'm the good guy. If it's something bigger than that, then you're in a cause. You're incorporating people in a cause, in a movement, not just pick me and not them.
Mm. Right. Yeah. Well, that's something that's very relatable. And as far that's something I think would be pretty surprising to a lot of people, just the villainization and the idea of the bad guy as it relates to the business world. What's something about your book that you think most people would be really surprised by?
How short it is.
It's 2 pages long.
Well, not that. It's most business books, when I put them down, I have said for years, this book is 1/3 or 1/2 too long. It's just a lot of fluff and filler. And part of that is the traditional publishing world has sort of insists on a certain size, somewhere between 65 and 90,000 words. So there's a certain kind of size and structure. And I self-published, so I wasn't bound by that. And this book is about 40,000 words. So one of the comments I've heard, and it's unexpectedly often, is how easy it is to read because it just doesn't have a lot of fluff. I get right to the point. Chapters are short. Ideas are right on the surface. And that's something I'm very happy about. And that took some rigorous editing too, because that's one of the best ways to make a great book is you need a great editor who will be ruthless. And my editor, Josh Burnoff, who is the Tesla of business book editors, that's his memory dart, which we figured out halfway through this process. He and I got along great. He's got a great sense of humor, as I do. I have a thick skin. He likes to be very blunt, and I like blunt. So we just had a fantastic time working on this book and making sure that above all things, it would be clear and simple.
Yeah. Well, talk about being on brand. I think people would really get a little discouraged if your book on clarity was 5,000-10,000 pages long. So
that would be horrible.
Yeah, good thing that wasn't the case. Self-published, that's pretty interesting. How did you decide to go about the self-publishing route? And based on your experience, would you recommend it? Or in any future books, are you kind of leaning towards going through a more traditional publishing house?
This was one of the biggest. I probably could have written this book 3 years ago, but I had this paralysis of analysis. How do I do this?
Wow.
There's all these options of publishing and what's best, and I'd go spinning around and around. And one of the things that Josh Burnoff helped me to do was he actually served as my Sherpa through the whole process of making decisions about what would be a good way to go. And so it was his guidance that led me to self-publish. And I also, through him and others, found the resources I needed, the layout people, the copy editing people. So you can fairly quickly assemble a great team of people to help you put out a book. And I think if you're in a hurry, I wanted to get this thing out. I didn't want to wait 18 months, which is what happens a lot of times with a traditional publisher. And I didn't want to go through the process of having to market the book and have an agent and be rejected. I just wanted to get it done. So if you've got something good, some good intellectual property, and you're not looking to hit the New York Times bestseller list, but you want something that you can use as the best calling card in the world for your clientele, then self-publishing is a great way to go. It's relatively affordable, it's quick, and Amazon makes it real easy. There are downsides to everything, but for me, it was the vast majority of it was upsides. And so I'm very glad for the choice I made. But I wouldn't ever make a blanket recommendation one way or another. It really depends on the person's goals.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's clearly worked very positively for you. So it's cool that you took that risk and went all in on it. And I know you have an amazing team around you. So that's very, very cool that you are the self-published King of Clarity.
The major thing you have to reconcile yourself to if you're going to do a book, and I heard this from many authors, whether they went traditional or self-publishing, is basically the promotion's up to you. You're going to have to promote the thing. So there's not only the process, the months of work in getting the thing, content created, getting it laid out, getting it all put in, then you've got a lot of work promoting it. And so it's a major commitment. You can't just whip out a book and then it's going to just sell all by itself.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Oh my goodness. It has been a lot of work, and yet one of the most effective avenues for me of promoting has been podcasts, doing podcast interviews.
Oh, how about that?
I have found that to be a fabulous way of gaining exposure and gaining people that are brand new to me and to the content. I got a note from someone just yesterday, and this is what makes an author's day. These kind of notes can blow you away. Just out of the blue from somewhere in Canada, some guy I'd never heard of. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for your devotion in helping individuals and businesses clarify their messages. I happened to hear you on the podcast, Brainfluence, and was amazed at how you spoke so clearly, so efficiently, and with a calming tone. That's my radio voice, I guess. I purchased your book right after hearing you and read it in a matter of hours. Thank you so much for your presence in my life. Have a great day. And, it's a huge amount of work doing this, but then you get a note like that, and I've had others, and you go, okay, this was worth it on many levels, but particularly that somebody heard me on a podcast, doesn't know who I am, bought the book, found it helpful.
That's amazing. I see how that you can make your day. So hopefully we'll get some more of those after we release this. Hey, Wild listeners, have you been wanting to start a podcast for yourself or your business, but didn't know where to start? Or do you have a podcast of your own, but you're struggling with the time commitment? I'd love to help. Shoot me an email at max@hippodirect.com with any podcasting questions you have. I'm also happy to jump on a 30-minute call where we can discuss your idea, planning, production, promotion, and other elements of the podcasting world. Let your podcast run wild. So let's switch gears a little bit to a different segment here. This one is focused on inspiration and creativity. So think about things that inspire you, ways you stay creative, et cetera, et cetera. First thing here, just in general, what do you do to stay creative?
Well, I've always done a lot of writing. So I do some blogging, and I now do more video, short video. It's taken me it's a few years to get comfortable with video as a format.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a steep learning curve there, yeah.
2 to 3 minute videos on one topic. Very, very interesting and fun to do. I've always loved photography, so I do a lot of photography on the side, just totally different change of pace. And my wife and I brought up 5 kids. The last one's just about to enter her senior year in high school, so that occupied a whole bunch of time.
That had to be a crazy house growing up.
My boys, it was nuts. It was real nuts. So I guess I'm going to probably be picking up new creative avenues and new hobbies now that most of the hands-on parenting is done.
Right. It's like your time is magically starting to free up, isn't it?
It is. It is. But the funny thing is, if somebody said, "I'm going to craft for you the ideal job," half of it for me would be speaking and writing, and half of it for me would be being out in the woods, maintaining trails, and being a groundskeeper. I just love getting my hands on trees, bushes,
Mm.
splitting wood, doing yard work. I just love that stuff. I would, I think I'd be a park ranger in a minute, and I'd be very happy.
Yeah. The park and you'd be the park ranger, the king. We'd have to come up with a memory dart for you there as far as
Oh
what
yeah.
Boris being a park ranger. But that's really cool. I mean, people talk about unplugging and how important it is, and clearly that ties into what you're doing as far as being out there with the woods and doing things with your hands in there. What are your favorite activities to do in the woods? Is it hiking? Is it climbing? What's that look like?
I love hiking. I love climbing. I love maintaining paths. Nobody in my neighborhood knows probably that for the last 3 years, there's this path behind my house and behind our street that I've been working on doing all the maintenance clearing. I've eliminated almost all the poison ivy. The path is beautiful now,
Oh, wow.
and I
A lot
just
of neighborhoods could use you, Steve.
yeah, it's a sort of this private community service project. I mean, I'm not interested in being paid for it. I just love doing it. I can't stop
Right.
doing it. In fact, I have to clear paths. I don't know what that is, but I do.
I have this image of you walking around like with a machete, like in
Yep.
the jungle. But I won't tell anyone about your secret service,
Well,
your secret safe
that's not
debate.
far from the truth. It's not a machete, but I do have a device I use to clear the brush off of this path.
That's amazing. What other hobbies are you into outside of the outdoorsy things? I mean, are there things you like to listen to or read? What else do you do?
I read a lot, and I tend to read thriller novels, medical thrillers, science thrillers, crime thrillers. I'll read all
Mm,
those through, but I also read a ton of business books, but I have a very bad track record of finishing them. So I've got probably
mm.
about 8 or 9 books sitting here on my desk that I've gotten partway through. And I don't know what my problem is, but I love to read, but I don't always like to finish. I don't know why.
Right. Yeah. You must like some variety though, in terms of stories and stuff. And it's probably one, as I've experienced this too with some of the books that I've read, that just once you kind of grasp the concept and see enough examples of it, you don't need to see 5 or 6 more examples of it. So,
Right.
I get that. What comes to mind if you're going to name drop a few thrillers, as well as a few business books. I mean, you don't have to do 6 examples, but just a couple examples that come to mind. Any that you want to shout out that you really enjoyed?
The business books, there have been some really good ones lately. Mark Schaefer's always written well, and his Marketing Rebellion is excellent. I've always
Mhm.
enjoyed Seth Godin's books, and
Yeah, he's got a few of them.
yeah, his Purple Cow book was very influential in shaping my mind about differentiating and the importance of differentiating. That has been huge for me. And then thrillers, there are some authors that are pretty well known. Michael Crichton, who unfortunately is gone now. David Baldacci, and there's a bunch of others that do legal or medical or technology thrillers. And I guess maybe I have a need for some excitement beyond just sitting at my desk doing my stuff. And I'm not going to go out and solve any crimes or tackle criminals. So this is my way
Right,
of of having it vicariously.
right. You'll clear some trails, though. We know that much.
Oh yes, yes, and look out for the machete.
Right. Yeah, you've been warned. Do you have a favorite thriller book of all time? Is there one book that you kind of keep going back to?
Hmm, that's a good question.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind.
Wow, I don't know. I usually read books once and then I'm done. Grisham's books have always been great. I've loved some of those books. I don't know if there's been one particular book that has stood out. I can't think of one.
Yeah. Well, it seems as though there's a few or a select group of authors that you you can relate to, and that you like their writing, and then you'll read multiple books of theirs. It's not like you'll be one and done. So that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I do like to read multiples. I guess maybe, if I had to pick one that would be a sort of a pinnacle example of what I really like, it would be The Hunt for Red October, which was made into an excellent movie too.
Oh yeah, that's a popular one.
So the combination of the fact that it was a great movie and a great book, and it was kind of, edge of the seat, wartime, high stakes, all that stuff. I loved it.
Right. Who doesn't like high stakes? Last question for this part. When you think about people that have been influential for you in your life, and obviously a lot of them are names that you've mentioned already, and some other thought leaders in the space, who's been most influential for you as far as going out on your own and developing your whole brand around clarity in your consulting? Who's been most influential for you doing that as opposed to going with a more traditional path?
I would have to say that not necessarily at the beginning, but maybe in the last 8 years or so, I've probably gained the most encouragement from just watching the example of how Mark Schaefer has developed his consulting, his writing,
Yeah.
his coaching, his speaking. And Mark and I both live in Tennessee, and we communicate on a regular basis. And he's just an exceptional human being as well. But I've observed him and seen what he does and how he carries himself and how he looks at opportunities. And in many ways, I've emulated some of the pathways that he's taken.
Yeah, that's an incredible example. I mentioned earlier, and that we had him on earlier this year, and I was familiar with him, and was familiar with a lot of his stuff. So I knew that just the quality you get from him is out of this world. But I was still blown away when he came on the show. Just the stuff he talked about, and how well spoken and how thoughtful he is, and how thoughtful he is before he speaks. Like he really
Mhm.
used a lot of powerful speakers, they'll embrace the silence when they're thinking of something or in between their thoughts. Blew me away with that. So totally on the same page with you there.
Yeah, there are smart people, there are talented people, and there are good people. And there are things that Mark does that in mentoring marketers that are younger, in reaching out to people that are just starting to learn. He is taking these later years of his life and he's giving back in a very focused way, in a very selfless way. And I appreciate that. It's not all about Mark. It's not all about, becoming the big superstar. He really wants others to succeed too.
He does. It's so incredibly selfless. So let's get to a fan favorite segment here called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Okay.
Exactly. So, Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where we talk about a recent ad or campaign that caught our attention. And speaking of previous guests, another previous guest that's a mutual buddy of ours, Jay Bear, with his book Talk Triggers, he did something really, really cool when he launched the book and to get the word out. Can you speak about that example?
Yeah, I've known Jay for years, and I really appreciate his work, and I also appreciate the fact that he's just a quality human being. When he and Daniel Lemon were going to release this book, Talk Triggers, they did a very smart thing, which was they put out, I think it was on Facebook, some ideas for book cover design, and the first ideas were really pretty awful. And they heard about it, and you have to have some humility and some thick skin to look for input and take input. And then they came back with this crazy idea of these two alpacas talking to each other on the cover. And one of my sons used to work at an alpaca farm, so I like alpacas.
Oh, wow.
And it was just, it was a reticular activating system moment. So alpacas are unexpected, they're novel, they're weird. And when you see alpacas on a business cover, it's going to get your attention. It's going to break through. So they went with it, they ran with it, and then they sent out boxes to influencers with stuffed alpacas. And they did this whole launch that was built around creating talk triggers and having their own talk triggers with these alpacas and with some of the like Doubletree Cookies, which is one of their case studies. They did a whole bunch of video case studies that were drawn from the book. It was just a fabulously done launch. And it was completely congruent with the message of the book. That was the best part about it, is it was an epitomizing of the book. So I loved watching that thing unfold. It was really great, and seeing the response of readers who would make their own videos or do things with the stuffed alpacas on video just for fun. And Jay, of course, is a great speaker. So when he speaks on the topic, he has some great stuff to share. And so of all the recent campaigns I've seen, that one really stood out to me.
Yeah. Well, clearly it was an effective talk trigger. And I love that example. You're blowing my mind, because I'm realizing now that I saw and experienced the early days of exactly what you were talking about when he was tweeting out book covers for feedback, but I didn't put two and two together until now that stuff was for talk triggers. And that's what ended up being used. I thought that at the time, I wasn't, I don't think he released too much info about what the book was. So I wasn't sure what it was, but I remember there were some options with like quote bubbles on it and sorts of different things, but they were, compared to the final product, they were pretty bland designs.
Correct.
That's nothing against Jay. That's just how much more powerful the final design is. And they completely transform it. And I think that alpacas are such a random thing, but there's huge images on them on the cover, and it's also bright pink. And it really stands out on the shelf and on Amazon as well. And when you talk about epitome of the book, I mean, you've done the same thing with your book as far as being a clear and concise book, and it's a book about clarity. So that makes sense. You've done that yourself. He's done that as well by creating Talk Trigger, his book about talk triggers. But I think that's something that any author can really rally around and bring into life with their book, is whatever the book is about, come up with an idea to promote it that ties really closely back to what it is. And there's endless ways to do that. So he nailed it. You nailed it as well. So that's really, really cool example.
Well, the interesting angle with him is that they tried to create one talk trigger that was going to be, they thought was going to be the main talk trigger, and it didn't work. It was the alpacas. So they thought the main talk trigger that they were really initially promoting was the idea, buy this book. If you don't like it, we will buy any book in the world to replace it.
Right. Yep.
Was very bold and all of that. But that didn't get anywhere near the play as those crazy alpacas did.
Hey, what can I say? Alpaca's so hot right now. But so that's the Wild Business shout out of the week. Only got time for a little bit more here. I'd love to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
I'm ready, I think.
Oh yeah, you never know for sure. Let's get wild. You have 5 sons, which, just talk about alpacas in an animal house. 5 sons. What's your biggest parenting tip for having 5 kids? Let me clarify that. For parenting 5 kids, we know how you had them.
Yeah, I'll give a tip that I give in some of my workshops for when I talk to people about communication and collaboration. One of your best friends for parents, and many parents learn it and some haven't learned it yet, is young kids respond to an external authority. And one of the best ways you can get your kids to do what you want them to do is to remove the element of a personal, I told you to go to bed right now, and they said, I don't want to move it to the external authority, which is the clock. When you teach the kid that when the hand is on the 8, that means 8 o'clock, and that is bedtime. And you don't get out of your bed until the hand is on the 7, and that's when you can get out. And the funny thing is that most kids will respond to an external authority. They can't fight a clock. And it's much easier to get your kids to respond to an external rule or an external authority, like a clock or something that's bigger than you, the parent. It removes it from an interpersonal fight to just an inevitability. It's a wonderful trick.
It is, and it's true. Nobody wants to fight with the clock, but that's amazing. And I take it growing up, your kids had a ton of sleep at the Woodruff household, so that was pretty effective.
Well, they weren't allowed. They had bedtimes. They had pretty rigid bedtimes, and they couldn't get
Yep.
out. Even if they woke up, they couldn't get out of bed until a certain time. Now, 1 second after that time, here they came down the stairs. But that gave my wife and I the time and the sanity each morning that we didn't have to deal with chaos.
Well, time and sanity is very important. So you mentioned earlier that at the start, and you're going to college, you're thinking you're going to study astronomy, and you had a big interest there. What is your favorite constellation? This is a very unique question.
Mm. Because it's closest and because it's a beautiful spiral, I guess I'd have to say Andromeda. But all the
Read my mind.
spiral galaxies, when you look at them from different angles, and whether it's the Whirlpool galaxy or M3 or the others, I just absolutely, my one of my goals in life is to hop on the Starship Enterprise and go light speed and visit galaxies, because they're just stunning. The beauty, the glory, the magnificence, the huge infinite size of these bodies of stars. Absolutely stunning, and still probably my favorite thing in the whole creation is looking at what's out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, that's an interest of my dad as well, who's our president and founder at Hippo Direct. And for last year, for his birthday, we got him a telescope. So we might have to hit you up. You might have some questions. You might need to give us some pointers on that. I feel like you got some more experience there. How about pet peeves? What's your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is UPS trucks. I explain it in the book that I think UPS is one of the for all the effectiveness of their delivery and their logistics, their marketing is awful. And I ask people all the time whenever I give a talk or a workshop, what is on the side of the UPS truck besides the logo? Nobody knows, because they have these two generic phrases that do not pass the RAS test. And they have 120,000 moving billboards all over the world with a message that nobody absorbs. And that to me is the biggest marketing sin of all time. So the two phrases that they'll have either both or one or the other on the truck, is synchronizing the world of commerce, which is a wonderful phrase if you're an executive in supply chain management, but nobody of the common person seeing a UPS truck is going to understand or absorb that message. And the other one, shorter, but also very general and generic, is worldwide services. So what's services? I mean, what does that mean? It's a complete empty commodity phrase. Worldwide is okay, but services? And so these things that they've put on their truck are true, but they're not communicating to the average human being in their home that sees 100 of these trucks a month and never, ever remembers what they say.
That's incredible. I actually thought you were going to go in a different direction there. Did you know that a lot of their trucks, they don't paint the top of them brown, they keep them white?
Yeah, probably. It's just everything's about efficiency. So I would imagine that's not absorb heat. And they also, 90% of their turns are right turns and not left turns. So they're not against traffic. So they've got the operational efficiency down, but their marketing is awful, including their campaigns like "What Can Brown Do For You?" and "We Love Logistics" and all this other crap that they've thrown money at. It's awful. And, I can't get over the fact that if you have 120,000 moving billboards and nobody understands you, you're not communicating.
Right. Yeah. We got, I'm sure we'll get a UPS sponsorship any minute now.
Probably not now.
They must be very happy with us. But back to the paint thing, I live in an apartment 3 stories up, and so I have an aerial view of things. And I had just always assumed, because of the whole "What Can Brown Do For You" thing, I assumed that everything all their branding is brown. And then I see this truck coming by and the top looks like just unfinished paint. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I looked it up. I actually tweeted about this earlier this year. I looked it up and it's like a widespread thing. People are shocked when it's like that. So now we've got more things to add to the list for UPS. So thank you for that. Last question here. If you had to eat the same food every meal for the rest of your life, what food would that be?
Barbecue ribs.
Yes, absolutely love it. And you're in a good part of the country for that too.
So that was, it wasn't the main reason we moved to the Nashville area 5 years ago, but it wasn't a small reason either. I love the barbecue. I love biscuits. I love the way food is prepared here. I don't need all the fried food, but man, I love barbecue.
Right, but a little bit of it. Yeah, I never get sick of it as well. So, Steve, I know we got to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all the background of how you became I almost said Klingon, how you became the King of Clarity, and more of your background, and even learn some stuff about astronomy and calculus. So there we go. But
yep.
Before we sign off here, what's the best place for people to connect with you? And also, where's the best place that they can find your book?
So the book, I made one easy link, claritywins.org, and that goes right to the Amazon page where people can order the book. My website is clarityfuel, FUEL.com. Or on Facebook, if you do a search for King of Clarity, well, then you'll find me there too. If you forget all of that, then you just Google Steve Woodruff and you'll find me.
Perfect. Easy enough. And to wrap us up here, final thoughts. The stage is yours. It can be a quote. It can be whatever you want, but send us off, Mr. King of Clarity.
One of the quotes that I use it from George Bernard Shaw, and it's about the greatest problem with communications is the illusion that it has taken place. And I find that one of the things that we either often really struggle with, and we know we do, or we don't even know is a problem, is that we may exchange words or messages, but that doesn't mean communication has actually happened. And so clarity in communications is more than just a trick or a marketing tactic. It is the essence of getting your point across and getting through to others. So we can never forget the fact that we should not assume that people have actually heard, understood, or remembered. It's our job to make it easy for people to get it.
Get it, got it, good. Thank you so much, Steve, the King of Clarity, the memory dart man himself, for coming on the podcast. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. To be crystal clear in closing, here's what you can do to keep those creative juices flowing. Number 1, make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you're not already, and leave us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. Number 2, check out the fascinatingly wild marketing and business growth resources at hippodirect.com/blog and hippodirect.com/newsletter. That newsletter is the Hippo Digest, and it's your weekly recap of creative marketing from all around the web. And number 3, look for that multi-talented hippo and come say hey on social media at the handles HippoDirect and Max Brandstetter. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!